Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, I'd like to talk about Jane the Virgin. It's a sort of telenovela, a soap opera, if you will. It's on Netflix. I don't know where it actually originated from, but Netflix is where I've watched it through with Claudia. Also, in other news, we revamped the website. The old website, I had it set up on a more expensive server plan because originally I was hosting video on that server, and the cost of bandwidth was kind of expensive to the point where I couldn't have like a shared network or anything like that. So I had my own little my own server that I was just running things on, and that was kind of pricey. And come tax year, you sit around doing your budget, and I need to save some cash if I can, and switching over to a cheaper server plan was the way to go. In the process, the old website was had a bunch of things in it that were old and dysfunctional, and it took a lot more maintenance. So we streamlined the website down to just like sort of a mobile-friendly thing. There's a couple of big buttons to click on, and it tells you where everything I do kind of is. More or less, it's just got like links to all my different YouTube channels, and like Newgrounds and Twitch, Twitter, Tumblr, all the stuff that I use. And I'm thinking about adding things to the site, but I'm not entirely sure what I want to put in there yet. I'm thinking about maybe having like a playlist button, and then you can click that and it'll just show you all the individual playlists that I have, like for every single channel. You click on it and it'll just take you to the video playlist and you can watch it from there. I might do that. I've got the store in there. But the whole thing is pretty far streamlined, a lot simpler than it was, and I figure I may as well just give into this because everything that I do is kind of like not really in a central location anyway. So one of the best things that my website can do is provide you with just a central location to find where everything that I do is. Anyway, Jane the Virgin. So this was a show that Claudia wanted me to watch. She was really into it. It's a soap opera, more or less, like a telenovela, filmed or written kind of after the style of the Spanish soap operas. They're telenovelas. And the premise of the show is that there's this woman named Jane who goes to see a gynecologist who then artificially inseminates her with a random guy's sperm. And the whole thing kind of, that's where the chaos of the show begins. The show starts off pretty promising in the fact that, I start off liking Jane, but as the show goes on, gradually I learn to hate Jane and everything that she represents. It's kind of funny, like she starts off as this sort of like likable character, and you can sort of say like, okay, like I could see, but then like gradually she just starts making lots of really self-centered choices, and there's never really any true comeuppance for her. So she sort of like always comes away with the best end of things, in spite of sometimes really causing some of the larger problems. I mean, like, she's not like the biggest problem causer, but it's sort of weird. So anyway, it turns out that she's got this boyfriend and she's engaged to him, right? She's been with this guy for 2 years, and he has agreed to wait for marriage before they have sex. Like, she's really hung up about whether or not you can have sex before you get married. Her grandmother, her abuela, told her, like, once you have sex, you can never go back. Like, once you lose your virginity, you're just permanently altered. It's forever. You can't lose your virginity twice. And physically speaking, I believe that this is actually false. The alterations to your body, like the idea that you have your hymen broken, I think is kind of a myth. Like, the hymen's not really like a flap that completely covers the vagina. It's actually kind of a thing you can it stretches, and then it can actually go back into place if you don't have sex for a while. So, I mean, theoretically, you could kind of go back. But anyway, Abuela doesn't know this, but Abuela assumes that it's permanent. And she tells Jane, she says, don't ever have sex, ever, unless you're married. And Jane lives in mortal fear of upsetting her Abuela, I guess, so she spends her entire life never having sex. So she meets this guy, and his name is Michael. And she's like, Michael, I can't have sex. And he says, all right. And he agrees not to have sex with her for 2 years. 2 years they're together, and so they get married. They take their time, they have a normal relationship, they have no sex, and then he proposes to her. He's like, yeah, even without the sex, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Like, this person, it's all I care about. We'll have sex after the marriage. That'll be great. That'll be fun. I'm looking forward to that. So she comes home and she's like, oh, I'm pregnant. And Michael's like, but what? With who? Like, I abstained from sex with you for 2 years. How are you pregnant? And it turns out that the sister of this rich, like, millionaire is also an alcoholic fruitcake and her girlfriend was cheating on her, so she's a lesbian too. She's an alcoholic lesbian fruitcake, and she, in a state of emotional disarray, injected her brother's semen into this girl. And what was really going on was that his wife, the guy's name is Raphael, his wife Petra was trying to get herself pregnant with his sperm, because their marriage was failing and she was trying to rescue the marriage by getting pregnant with his baby. He'd had cancer, he couldn't have kids anymore, so by unfreezing his sperm and injecting it into herself, she was forcing him to, stay with her. He wouldn't get a child any other way. And this was kind of nefarious because of the fact that later on you find out she'd actually had multiple miscarriages. So the fact that, she'd been through multiple miscarriages kind of implied that there might be something wrong, and having kids would be really hard. So, really she was probably just wasting a sperm sample based on statistical data. But, it's a telenovela, and that means that drama abound, drama everywhere. So the show kind of winds up being about a bunch of different things. Like, they're just constantly creating drama left and right. And the first bout of drama that you get into is that Jane meets this Raphael guy, and she starts to realize that Raphael is superficially very sexy. And the more that she wants to have sex with Raphael, the more she starts to question whether or not she wants to marry Michael, because, she'll lose her opportunity to have sex with Raphael if she marries Michael. Now, I wouldn't have put it this way if the show didn't develop the way that it did. Originally, she describes it as well, I have feelings for Raphael, I'm starting to fall in love with Raphael. And, the show has it her heart glows when she's talking to him and this and that. And so episode after episode, she's kind of warming up to this attractive millionaire. And, they sort of imply that, there's tension. And Michael, of course, he takes a little bit of distance from her because she's pregnant with another man's baby, which, really kind of puts him off. He's not really happy about that. But once he's backed up a little bit and he's thought about things, he comes back and he says, all right, look, I'll help you raise the baby. You're more important to me than anything, and I don't want to lose you, over something that was out of your control. I can't blame you, and the child can't be blamed, and so I won't take it out on either of you. I'm in it for life, you and me. And she goes, thanks, but I met a hotter, richer guy, and she just dumps Michael on his face. She just walks away from him. 2-year relationship, meaningless. She just leaves it behind. And at this stage, you really don't know Michael very well. He's also a cop, and there's a murder at the hotel that this rich playboy, this rich guy owns, and he's established as kind of a playboy. They look at his history, and basically it was just booze and sex with loose women all of his life. That's just kind of who he was. And, so there's not really, it's not really implied that he's really all that redeeming of a guy. And so it turns out that after the murder was actually related to, drug crime. And Michael starts poking into this family, into Raphael's family, and over the course of the television show, you find that Raphael's family, on his father's side, is involved in, embezzlement and art theft and all kinds of white-collar crimes. And then on his mother's side, everyone's involved in drugs and forgery and all kinds of other things. So the money's all dirty. None of this stuff is clean. None of the family's clean. And the only thing that's clean, as far as I can tell throughout the entire show, is the Marbella, the hotel. That's the only legit business that they seem to do. And that's the only clean thing they've got. But of course, business starts to go down because as all this drug stuff starts erupting around the hotel, it gets really bad press for the hotel. And so, all the assets that were illegal kind of get frozen, and so it becomes more about, Raphael trying to save the hotel, while also dealing with the drama of, my wife is insane, because Petra, it turns out, is just completely sociopathic, and she's been sleeping with Raphael's best friend, and Petra really takes a weird turn. Petra starts off as this really awful character who's just really just vicious and out to get everybody. She's conniving, she constantly stabs people in the back. And then as the series goes on, eventually Petra becomes more compelling and more interesting than Jane, because you find out that Petra, she's sort of this underhanded rogue type character because she came from like the Czech Republic as like a poor woman who was dating like a crime boss or something like that. And so she's just been like bounced around from just really rough situation to rough situation. Like her ex-boyfriend threw acid in his mother's face because they had a disagreement. Like these kinds of things. Like this was the environment that she lived in. And so, you know, she was hearing this whole thing with this like cutthroat. She's surrounded by all this like cutthroat money politics, and the dad's like, you know, embezzlement, white collar crime. Mom's like drug lord, this and that. And Petra is just like, well, you know, I understand how this works. So Petra is just, you know, like stabbing people in the back, trying to make sure that she's okay in the long run, because she understands that, you know, no one's going to be there for her if she's not looking out for herself. So, yeah, initially she doesn't come off as that. Initially she's played up just purely as the villain, and so you kind of get this perspective of her as being just this crazy, twisted woman. But, you know, as you learn about her, she kind of becomes endearing. Anyway, though, so the show kind of goes on, and it kind of becomes like it's really about Jane. Jane is like the protagonist of the series, and like I say, at some point she just says like, well, I want to have sex with Raphael, so she dumps her boyfriend Michael on his ass and then runs off with Raphael for a while. And then it turns out that dating a guy with all this baggage, where like, you know, his mom's a drug lord and his dad's you know, a white collar criminal, like this is really tough, especially because later on, like his stepmom, who's also a drug lord, like his mom is a drug lord, and his stepmom is a drug lord. And by the way, spoilers. Anyway, this is they reveal these things periodically, but just as if I try to go through the actual like string of events in this thing, you guys will have no idea what's going on because they have all these like twists. But anyway, though, so his stepmom, he's got a stepmom and a mom, and they're both drug lords, so it doesn't matter. On his mom's side, regardless of how you define mom, drug lords. And so his stepmom, Rose, kills his dad, and I can't explain why exactly. As the cops start to come down on the Marbella, the dad's like, oh, we have to run away. You know, I'm going to my home in like, I don't know, Croatia or something like that. It's some I can't remember where he was going, but it didn't have an extradition treaty with the U.S. So Rose, the drug lord, kills the dad, and then she runs off to Croatia or something like that. I don't know why. Like, I'm not entirely sure why she felt compelled to kill the dad, but she did. And I think that the reason she killed the dad was that so she could hook up with his daughter. The daughter's name was Louise. Louise was the drunk lesbian fruitcake that impregnated Jane. And so, that was also part of the drama, is like whether or not Jane was going to sue Louise. And if Jane had sued Louise, she would have become a co-owner of the Marbella, because she would have obtained Louise's shares. And, you know, so anyway, so that's kind of like this bit of drama. But eventually, as Jane starts having well, she doesn't have sex with Raphael. As Jane starts dry humping Raphael without actually having sex with him, she becomes so attached to Raphael that she doesn't want to sue his family anymore because she wants a healthy relationship with his insane family. So, you know, she drops her potential lawsuit, which turns out to be a mistake in the long run. And so she just kind of like hangs around with Raphael. And eventually the drama from being with Raphael gets to be more than she can handle. So she starts thinking about how good things were with Michael. And this was really funny because, like, at one point there's a narrator who's probably my favorite character in the whole show. And this narrator kind of, like, tells you about things and this and that. And at one point the narrator's like, to his dying breath, Michael would truly believe that Jane was the love of his life. And I remember I turned to Claudia after he said that, and I was like, well, you know, that means that he can't get back together with, like, he has to die the fool, right? Like, he's gonna die soon. He's gonna die before he hooks up with Jane again. And Claudia was like, why do you say that? And I said, well, because if Jane, like, dumped this guy that she'd been with for 2 years to fool around with this other guy, then Jane's kind of deplorable. Like, it really it's kind of a black mark on her character if you think about her motivations. Because she had this guy who, you know, like, if you come back to him, you say, like, well, things were actually good with him. And, you know, it would just make Jane look really bad. It would make her look really childish and impulsive, and, like, she doesn't care very much about Michael. And this and that. Like, I just thought that there were a lot of implications tied to the idea of her going back to Michael. And sure enough, the first time I really started to kind of, like, turn on Jane in this show was when she goes back to Michael. Like, Raphael gets to be too much, and she's like, oh, wow, like, you know, you're rich and you're hot, but, like, I wasn't really expecting struggle from you. I thought my life would be on easy street. So she goes back to Michael, who is really not a very good cop. He's like committed tons of felonies throughout the course of all this because he doesn't follow procedure at all. But Anyway, she goes back to Michael, and she's having all these like flashbacks and memories of like how great Michael was and all the reasons that she was with Michael, and like how he was super patient and super understanding, and there was absolutely no justifiable reason to leave him in the first place. And she was so stupid to have left him in the first place, because I mean, he like really just didn't deserve it. And so she's just like, oh, like, you didn't deserve this, Michael. Like, I'm ready to accept you back in my life. And now, again, mind you, this wasn't something like she needed time to think and she just, like, got her head out of the clouds and she was like, you know what, Michael's always been there. It was like she left him, she fooled around with another guy for a while, found that the other guy was challenging, and then went back to Michael because he was, like, easier. Like, it just felt dirty and wrong. I really hated this. And so, yeah, so Michael, though, for whatever reason, Michael has been pining after her this entire time, and so he just like takes her back, and then there's like all this fighting between him and Raphael, and again, you know, it's sort of like there didn't need to be this fighting between him and Raphael. I was kind of upset with Michael. Like I noticed that a lot of the male characters in the show, they don't seem to have a lot of their own personal agency. Their lives really revolve around Jane. And so for whatever reason, like I really wanted Michael to move on. Like, it's demonstrated a few times that Michael develops sort of close relationships to other women. While he's broken up from Jane, he actually is sleeping with one of his co-workers, but as a sort of a rebound thing. And so they have this kind of emotional closeness, and his co-worker's a little frustrated with him because she's kind of like, you know, I don't want to just be the rebound. And he's like, well, you know, truthfully, my heart belongs to Jane, and da-da-da. And so it's sort of like, in a way, I feel like they were trying to kind of make it to where Jane and Michael both had wrongs, but it's sort of like, Michael's not wrong if Jane left him. I mean, like, if they're not in a relationship, then he can have sex with whoever he wants. He's an adult. It's maybe not emotionally healthy for him to do this to this other woman, but she also knows the score, so it's kind of like, you know, he's creating trouble for himself, but he's being an adult about it, and he's out in the open. You know, Jane was just kind of like lying to herself about why she was really leaving him for Raphael, I feel like. So they hook back up, and Michael is there to, they have the child, and Michael's like, oh, like, I'm here. And then his, like, coworker runs off to Mexico, and then Michael goes to Mexico, and, you know, this is a little out of order. I don't know. There's twists and turns and whatever. But anyway, at whatever point, Michael's partner gets shot, and then he comes back from Mexico, and he's like, never mind. That was crap. Mexico was terrible. God, the drug cartels are really dangerous there. I'm here back in the States. I don't want to. And you know, he's still kind of on the case, but he's on the case with a new partner. And the thing that they set up, this is important, is he's following the Rose case because she's a drug lord. He's trying to figure out what Rose is doing. And the catch is that, like, Rose is also, aside from running a forgery ring, she also does this plastic surgery thing. So what I assumed had happened was that Rose made a run for it, and then she used plastic surgery to alter her face so that she would be difficult to find. And, you know, she'd use forged documents to become someone else. She wasn't Rose anymore. She was some new person. And sure enough, she was a new person, but what it turns out that Rose is actually Michael's new partner at the police station. And so somehow Rose is able to forge documents showing that she's a police officer. She's able to fake being a police officer. Like, she gets through all this stuff, you know, she does everything. And I suppose it's not hard, granted that Michael doesn't seem to know anything about police procedure either, since he never follows it. So she just kind of like pals around with him, and he's like, let's go wiretap these guys. And she's like, don't we need a warrant? And he's like, no. And she's like, okay. So, you know, between the two of them, it really feels like neither of them have any police training, I suppose, and that's how she gets away with it. But in the end, though, it turns out like they'd actually hired a completely different actor to play this partner. And so I thought, like, yeah, you know, I guess they were like, oh, well, she got her face changed so much that they would need this other actor. Like, I was kind of thinking about, like, they had that angle, and I was waiting for them to reveal, like, oh, well, someone's going to be Rose, or Rose is going to show up, and she's going to be someone you don't expect because they change her face. You know, why else would they set up this plastic surgery angle? But then Michael's partner shoots him, like, in the chest, and she, like, Michael's partner just pulls off, like, a mask. Like, she'd been wearing, like, a Halloween mask this entire time that just looked like a person. And like, that was, you know, like, we'd gone through a lot of really stupid twists and turns. But that was when the show had me at the point where I was just like, oh, No, like, come on, like, no, if you were wearing a mask, like, it would have been so obvious, everyone would see through it, like, okay, lots of makeup, maybe, I could believe, plastic surgery, alright, that makes sense, but just, like, you're wearing a mask, so you can bring back the actor who originally played Rose, no, and it looks even fake because she's tearing off the mask, like, they do the scene where she takes the mask off, and it doesn't look like the face would actually work like that. I mean, like, it's like a whole other layer, like a thick layer of skin, you know, to hide, like, you would just have, like, this really big fat head. It would, even if it were realistic looking, it would still be stupid. It just wouldn't work. And so anyway, it turns out that the partner was Rose. I don't know why she had to be there herself, like, actually in the arms of the police, pretending to be a police officer. That was a really dumb and risky move. But, yeah, there's a bunch of crap that happens that doesn't matter. You know, like, Rose pretends to be dead and she's not actually dead and this and that. She disguised herself as a nurse. But anyway, the point is, the entire time she was having sex with Luis, and for whatever reason, Luis didn't know that Rose was actually Rose, even though later on they show the masks, and the masks, like, clearly have, like, a line that's like, here's where the mask attaches. So I think that Luis was maybe just every time they had sex, I guess she was drunk and loopy and whatever. So Luis throughout this entire show is just having sex with Rose, the drug lord, the person who, like, killed her dad, and all this other stuff. So Rose and Luis run off together. You know, Luis probably a character that I hate more than anyone. She just never contributes anything positive to anyone's life. But they try to set her up at the end of the show. Like, I'm just gonna fast forward ahead because we start to, like, for one whole season, it feels like we kind of focus in on the minutia of Jane's life, where Jane kind of gets established with Michael and she gets cozy with Michael, but then Michael can't go back to being a police officer, or rather he can, but he's stuck on desk duty, which he hates, because he got shot, and so he fails his physical because his body just can't keep up anymore. And he's like, I don't want to do desk duty. Oh, you know what I ought to become? A lawyer. And I thought that was really funny. And I was like, yeah, like, as far as I understand, like, there's more lawyers than jobs right now. Being a lawyer, you may as well be an artist. You know, it's kind of that level of unemployment. And a lot of lawyers, they get stuck doing grunt work. You know, they wind up having to do a lot of paperwork. It's very desk intensive. Like, you really don't get to do all these cool, like, you know, showroom court trials or whatever. You're not doing these big trials as, like, a start out lawyer. You have to work your way all the way up and then get involved in, like, some big thing. And of course the best paid lawyers are, like, corporate lawyers who, you know, ideally are probably mostly got to be dealing in, like, tort law rather than criminal law. You know, like, maybe he was going to work his way up to be a DA or something like that. That might have been his angle. I don't know. Like, it seemed really weird for someone to be like, I don't want to do a desk job. I hate paperwork. And then be like, oh, but you know what would work for me? Lawyer. Being a lawyer. Yeah. You know, no paperwork in that. Be on the beat every day. You know, like lawyers walking around the street. That's why they call them ambulance chasers, I think. Because they have to literally chase the ambulances. So, yeah, I don't know why they did that. But anyway, though, Michael spontaneously dies. And then Jane is all sad about it. And Claudia was like, are you not upset about Michael's death? And I was like, I'm more upset that Michael came back to Jane at all. Like, you know, like, for as much as they try to attach you to him and try to make him really sympathetic, like, Michael lacks very much independence. He's constantly just shown to be a supporting character for Jane. Like, throughout the entire telenovela, he's really just every single thing that Jane does, he sort of just gives in to her in the end. Like, he may resist her for a little while, but ultimately he really is just enabling Jane at every single step of the way. And like I say, there are times throughout this show when Jane is being really self-centered and someone really just needs to tell her to knock it off. You know, it's sort of like there's other people in the world. You need to, I don't know, find a little bit of humility every now and then. And I don't know, everyone in the show, for whatever reason, it feels like by the end of the show, Jane winds up scot-free with no real enemies, even though she creates a lot of situations where people would naturally dislike her. And, you know, I don't know, everyone just kind of seems to yield to Jane. They sort of give in to Jane, including Petra, who spends a lot of time fighting with Jane over Raphael's affection. Like, later on, Petra does wind up getting pregnant with Raphael's children, and so she has twins, and then, like, Jane has her baby. And it turns out that Petra is actually a really good mom. She's got her kids whipped into shape. They're really well disciplined. They're doing great at school. And Jane is a super crappy mom because Jane is busy focusing on her novel and she's focusing on her family drama. And Jane is focusing on Jane. And whenever Mateo acts up, Jane kind of thinks of it as a reflection of herself. And so she refuses to like punish him. So her son is just all over the place. He's awful. He's like learning. He's behind all the other kids. They're concerned about his growth and development and stuff like that. So Jane's like an awful mom. And Petra kind of winds up worrying because it's sort of like Raphael is more focused on Jane and his son Mateo than he is on Petra and their twins. Jane just requires more attention around the clock. Like, Petra's self-sufficient. Petra's like who you'd actually want in a partner because Petra would be able to like function as a team with you. Jane is like a freaking anchor around your neck. She's like an albatross, just a curse on you and everyone you know. Like she's just awful, and so it's kind of like Petra's really worried. And it was sort of funny. It was like illustrating really why cheating and having like two baby mamas is a really bad idea, because like raising a family is kind of it's a commitment. Like, you need a lot of attention. And so if you're bouncing back and forth between two women and like one woman's a problem causer, sort of a home wrecker, well, the problem causer is she's the squeaky wheel. She's the one who always gets the grease. So Petra's being kind of neglected. And again, like, I start to really feel for Petra, because Petra throughout this show, she may be conniving and she may be sociopathic and she may like ruin lives and do all these awful things. But Petra really is like Jane kind of wins all the time in spite of being sort of an awful self-centered person. And Petra's also sort of awful and self-centered, but it feels like people, they occasionally give her things, but it's always with strings attached. Like, people sometimes come in and they save her at the last minute from disaster. And it rescues her, so she's able to bounce back and kind of return to her role as potential villain sometimes. And also sometimes she's the hero. But Petra is struggling and fighting so much just to stay, like, in the game that by the end of the series, I really care about this character, and I'm really kind of just like worried about whether or not she's going to be able to hang in there for a little bit longer. Because every time she gets a pop to the face, her nose bleeds. But whenever Jane gets popped in the face, like, every single character, like, cast and crew, like, the cameraman gets down from the camera and he runs over to, like, baby Jane and be like, oh, Jane. The narrator sympathetic, like, oh, Jane, oh, I'm so sorry, Jane. The narrator's kind of sympathetic to Petra, too, from time to time. But, like, Petra's family is out to get her. Like, Jane's got all this family that's supporting her. Petra's family is, like, trying to, tie her to the railroad tracks. Like, they're all devious. They're all evil. At one point, like, Petra's sister shows up, and Petra's sister puts Petra in, like, a coma for multiple episodes. She's, like, drugging her, and so Petra's just, like, stuck in a coma. And like, Petra's awake the entire time. She just can't move her body. And so, like, this is, like, Petra's life. Like, Petra is just, like, suffering and tenaciousness. And so by the end of the show, I'm, like, really rooting for Petra. I'm like, man, like, Petra's a fighter. Like, Petra's, like, this kind of badass character. She's constantly getting, like, banged in the kneecaps, just messed up. She hits these stumbling blocks, but she'll just, like, pull the situation out of the fire at the last minute and, triumphantly hold victory, crack it open and feast on its innards, and then be on her feet, like on her guard for the next big problem to hit her. So, like, Petra, she winds up being kind of that person who, like, if you were gonna partner up with someone, I mean, she's super untrustworthy, but so is Jane, and at least Petra seems, like, tenacious, like, she can hang on. So if for whatever reason Petra really wanted you in her life, and you were committed to not making her life be worse than it is, you might have something there. But Jane is just sort of, like, committed to being Jane. And Jane is just, like, this kind of, like, doughy, like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. She's crying constantly because it's got that telenovela bent to it, It's like, oh, I'm so sad. And so she just, like, I'm just kind of, like, watching her, like, flop over and just, like, oh, I'm in love with Raphael now. Oh, and it just, like, flops over on Raphael. And it's like, oh, this is hard. She flops back over to Michael. And it's like, oh, Michael's dead. And she's just, everything. She's got to just kind of, like, flop into her next little situation, and then let other people kind of pick her up and then shove her along and move her on to the next success, because no one really wants, like, she's the protagonist, and so she kind of, like, has these dramatic moments. but everyone like around her motivates her to succeed. You know, there's a theme of family being very important throughout the show, and so to kind of illustrate that, Jane is worthless and everyone else around her is like amazing. Turns out that her dad is a famous telenovela star, and so he's like wealthy, and he comes across as like superficially self-centered, but he's actually probably one of the most caring, concerned, like empathetic characters in the entire show. Whenever anyone has problems, like he goes out of his way to try and help. And if they're too proud to ask him for help, he does his best to help them succeed without them realizing that he's helping them. You know, like he'll pull little strings and stuff like that from the background, like Jane's mom Zoe is there. And it was kind of funny by the end of it. Like I was like, yeah, the way it feels like is like Zoe is like 14 years old. You know, she's kind of all about sex and she makes these really irrational decisions, but you can kind of follow her logic. And then Jane is like 12 years old. Like, Jane just screws up everything, you know, she constantly needs to be supervised. Without people there to make sure she's not getting into trouble, she will, you know, cause trouble. So they're both kind of like kids a little bit. And then, like, Rogelio, he comes back and he hooks up with Zoe for a while, and he's like, oh, you know, like, I kind of want to have another child. Like, I missed out on Jane's childhood because you got pregnant and we split up, and I didn't see you throughout all of Jane's life. Like, you know, I'm really sorry about that, and I really wish that I could have raised her with you. And I want to settle down. Like, you were an amazing woman, and you still are an amazing woman. And I really want to settle down and start again, like do another family. And Zoe's like, no, I can't do that. And so she throws his wedding ring back in his face. But Rogelio still sticks around. Rogelio's like, I understand, you know, he's upset and he's wounded, but he respects everyone's opinions. And it doesn't come across quite like it does with Jane. Like, everyone feels like they're giving up parts of their life to help Jane. Like, people who help Jane wind up diminishing themselves a little bit. It feels like they lower themselves down. They sacrifice some of their dignity from time to time. But when Rogelio does things, he always kind of carries like a dignified air about the whole thing. Like, the impression I get is that he just really has that big of a heart, and that he would bend over to help just about anyone if he felt like they were his friend. So, like, when he helps Jane, it doesn't feel like he's diminishing himself. It just feels like this is Rogelio as a character, you know? This is just what he would do. He's just this kind of guy. Like, if he had nothing to his name, he would go out of his way to earn a little bit of something just so he could give it to you. You know, it's kind of like this is who this guy is. So Rogelio, I really get to like Rogelio as a character. He's a lot of fun. He's kind of a ham, you know, a lot of times, but he's just this, like, cute, heart of gold type of character. And so I really, really like Rogelio. And, you know, he goes along well with this really self-centered, like, family, because he's so selfless. Like, they constantly demand things, they constantly need attention, and Rogelio's just willing to give it, so he just kind of like jives with them well. It's like, oh, Rogelio to the rescue so often. And occasionally they're forced to also do nice things for Rogelio because he's such an important part of their life. Like, they can't just constantly ask things of him. Occasionally they have to do something to make his life good too. So, you know, like, there's a little bit of give and take. I feel like Rogelio's the more selfless, but, you know, there's some return on this. And, you know, Rogelio never asks for anything anyway, so he's a great guy. Yeah. Abuela's also really great. Like, she kind of acts as this sort of mentor character, and this, very kind of like, she's very respectable. She comes across as like very wise and very respectable, incredibly patient, and she would have to be with a daughter and granddaughter, like the two that they have. I don't know, they must get it from their father, because Abuela gives like she shows no signs of being really terribly impulsive. I mean, like, there are some histories from her youth. Maybe she mellowed out as she got older, but she comes across as just this like very wizened character, and she's that character who often comes in like after Jane has done something super self-centered and ruined everyone else's life by being Jane. Like, Abuela comes in and she's like, maybe just stop being so self-centered for a little bit. And then Jane's like, you know what? You're right, Abuela. And then Abuela's like, oh, thank you. You know, like, I appreciate being appreciated. You know, so Abuela, too, just this very sweet character. Like, the show has these sweet characters that you can kind of get attached to. And you're like, oh, you know, I still like Abuela. You know, I like Petra. I like Rogelio. You know, Raphael, I could kind of take or leave. Michael, I'm just disappointed in. Come on, man, you could have done better. Jane, I learned to hate. I also really disliked Metellio, but that's because Metellio is like he's like a little 2-year-old who's just causing destruction, and he's super self-centered, and his mom won't punish him. You know, send him to his room. Just, you know, for goodness sake, like, just punish that kid when he acts up. put your foot down occasionally. You know, don't just tell him he's a good boy all the time. So, anyway, though, so the show ends with Luis, Raphael's brother, coming back, and Rose gets arrested, and the whole reason why they came back is because Raphael calls her, and he's like, oh yeah, my cancer relapsed. And so Luis shows up with, like, the mass murderer, Rose, and the police arrest her, and then Rose is like, your brother tricked you, and Luis is like, oh, he wouldn't. And then she gets all mad, because she's like, you lied about your cancer. And then Raphael very rationally is like, you lied about dating an international murderer and drug lord. And she could, like, at one point in the show, Rose actually kidnaps his son. So it's like, she kidnapped my son, and it's not, well, I don't know, it's one of Rose's henchmen that kidnaps the son anyways. It's like, she kidnapped my son, like, she murdered this guy, she murdered our dad, she murdered this guy, she murdered that guy, she was a drug lord, you know, she shot Michael, you know, there's all these things, and it was just like, all this stuff, like, your sex partner was a mass murderer. Like, there's a lot of stuff in our family going on, but she was by far the most evil person. And, like, you lied about all that for, like, 2 years or whatever. That's how long it takes for this kind of, the show to go. And then, so Luis, though, she's like, yeah, but you lied to me this once about cancer. And so Luis, just furious, decides that, it turns out that because of a clause in the will, like, actually Raphael isn't technically entitled to any of the family's money after the dad died. So Luis gets the will, and at the end of the series, as far as I watched, Luis, like, boots Raphael out of the company and takes all of his money away. And I just, like, I don't know if there's another season that's currently airing or anything like that, but I just, like, at the end of all of this, I was just really mad, because Luis is, like, the character who I hate the most. Like, I really dislike her because she hasn't done anything positive for anyone. And it really kind of upset me that she would be just this problem causer. You know, she's worse than Jane about causing problems, and she's emotionally unstable. She just needs, she's like, imagine Jane, but, like, 10 times worse. You know, she just can't do anything without dragging people down. And everyone that she's associated with winds up worse off from having associated with her. And so she takes over the hotel, and it's like, at one point during the show, she was actually holding a third of the shares for the Marbella, and she was just awful. Like, her involvement in the Marbella was actually harming it, I believe. Like, they were talking about how, like, you know, fewer people were coming to stay at the hotel. Her ideas were really stupid. She was dating a girl who was, like, a pro wrestler for a little while, and so she was, like, holding these pro wrestler things, and instead of making the Marbella, like, the Marbella was this really high-class hotel, but then, like, doing these, like, low-quality, like, her girlfriend was this sort of, like, second-rate, like, you know, pro wrestler, whatever, and so, like, by holding these sort of, like, second-rate pro wrestling things, and it was, like, all lady wrestling, it just kind of came across as sort of, cheap and, like, sex-oriented, and so it was hurting the reputation of the Marbella. So, like, on top of, like, the murders and everything else, it was also coming across as, like, a cheap, like, you know, place to gawk at, like, wrestler girls, whatever, that if you're into that fetish. So she was just kind of, like, doing harm and just doing things for the sake of her girlfriend, and she's just really stupid. And so she ousts Raphael, and originally it was Raphael, Petra, and Luis were the shareholders. Petra wound up a shareholder because at one point her criminal boyfriend from the Czech Republic showed up, and because he wanted her back in his life, he just bought a third of the Marbella for her and then gave it to her. And that was, like, one of those where it was like, I believe that she was about to be completely written out of the show. And that was one of those, like, Petra can't win anymore. She was fully defeated, completely wiped out. And it was like, I can't remember what she was going to do. I think she was going to go back to the Czech Republic. And then out of nowhere, like, her ex shows up and is like, oh, like, are you down and out? No, you're not, Petra. Let's get you back in the game. And so that's what I mean, is kind of like they have these moments where Petra would just lose, be completely defeated, you know, utterly annihilated. And then the show would throw her a bone and then get her back in the game. And then she would come back with a vengeance, you know. It would just be like, she'd come out, like, everyone would be like, Petra's done, Petra's gone, you know. Petra can't stab us in the back anymore. And then Petra would just come back, like, wielding an even bigger stick. And they'd just be like, oh, God. Like, how does Petra keep coming back? So, you know, like I said, she didn't really, like, save herself in that one, but it kind of, it's okay because she just really takes a beating. And it's funny, like, then as soon as she gets that edge back, as soon as she finds another avenue of attack, she goes right back at it. So I really got to be endeared to Petra just because she was so, like, they're like, Petra, like, how would you like an opportunity to attack again? And the thing that really, it wasn't even that she got the money back when she got this money back from her ex. It was like, yeah, I'll give you the money back, but then I'm a part of your life. And, like, her ex had anger problems, and because he was a criminal, like, at one point, he bought, like, a whole shipment of, like, 1,000,000 hand grenades and then kept them in the Marbella hotel while he tried to, like, sell them to arms dealers. And so Petra had to figure out how to, like, get rid of her ex and then get rid of all the grenades. So it's kind of like, it's not even like Petra really, it's not like someone just came in and they were like, hey, Petra, here's $1 billion. It was like, hey, Petra, here's $1 billion. Oh, but I'm also going to use the hotel to keep my illegal shipments of, like, firearms. And so it was sort of like, she really did cut a deal. Like, there was a pro and a con. Like, she signed a contract with the devil to get back into this fight that she was in. And so, like, you know, she goes through, and so she's kind of at this disadvantage of, like, okay, so my ex is here. But then she works through until she gets rid of the ex. She comes up with a scheme. She gets rid of him, you know, stabs him in the back. And then it's just her, and she's on top of the world again. And so now she's fighting from this high point, and people are trying to drag her down. And so again, like Petra, it's just sort of like, she's this conniving, compelling character that I grew to really like. Whereas Jane just continues to be this sad sack of garbage that they just push from point to point, and everyone else around her is always just like, oh, here's $1 million. You know, like, her dad is rich, and she won't ask for $1 million, but you know that if Jane ever needed $1 million, like, at one point, even Petra actually chips in to help Jane. Like, Jane can't afford to live in her house that she wants, and so Petra actually chips in, and without telling her, starts paying for half of Jane's rent. Like, this is how badly it is. This is how bad it goes for Jane. Like, this is why I really dislike Jane as a character in this show. Because you have, like, Petra, this character who has to, like, fight and scrape and battle for everything that she needs. And then finally, from her position of power, Petra reaches down and helps Jane out of the garbage pit, because that's where Jane belongs. And, you know, it's just like, all right, Jane, don't sit in the garbage. You know, here we go. Here's half your rent. And you know, it's just like constantly like this with Jane. And people reach in to help her so often that at one point, I'm not even sure if they were doing this comedically or not, but Jane starts calling everybody that she knows to figure out who it is who's, like, helping her financially this time. And I believe that was, like, she couldn't figure out who it was because she didn't think that Petra was helping her. So she called, like, Raphael, her rich ex-boyfriend, is like, are you helping me? And he's like, no. And then she called, you know, Rogelio, her rich dad, and he's like, oh, are you helping me? It's like, no. You know, she doesn't know where the money is coming from. Like, she's friends with all these fantastically rich people. Like, Rogelio is introducing her to, like, these famous stars and things like that. She winds up dating another, like, wealthy telenovela star after Michael dies, and da-da-da-da-da. Like, everyone just goes out of their way to help her all the time. But Petra earns it. Petra fights for it. Petra kills for it. So, you know, you just, I appreciate when Petra gets to the top. I don't care about whether or not Jane succeeds. I feel like she couldn't fail. Yeah. But anyway, though, I don't know exactly how this personal time is going to come across. You guys, a lot of people maybe, a lot of my viewers maybe haven't seen Jane the Virgin. This is one of these things, like, I watched it with my wife. I never would have thought to watch it on my own, unless my wife had recommended it to me. So, you know, I don't know how many of you guys have watched it yourselves. But if you want to watch some kind of a drama, it's a charming show. It's fun. I enjoy Jane the Virgin. If you have a girlfriend and you guys are looking for, like, something to binge watch together on Netflix, it's on Netflix. It's good fun. I recommend it. Maybe you guys won't come to hate Jane as much as I do. I spoiled a lot of the twists and turns for you, but some of the twists are kind of dumb anyway, and I didn't spoil all the twists and turns. There's, like, multiple seasons of things going in there. Yeah. But anyway, though, my thoughts on Jane the Virgin. Kind of a mess, but it would be really difficult to tell you a linear explanation of that whole series, so what can I say? Anyway, thanks for joining me, everybody. I'll catch you all next time.